Hello, everybody. Please share. Hope you're having a good evening. I'd be having a better evening, except that the news broke that Charlie Booker was beaten by roughly 1.5%, at least with 90% of the vote in, by Amy McGrath in Kentucky. And that is unfortunate. Joe Segura says New Mexico, and also good evening all. Thank you, Joe Segura. Steve Day says hi. Hi, Steve. And Russ says, I'm up to about chapter 4 in Stephanie's. Hope you're enjoying it, Russ. Rick says, evening all. Missed you. Lana says, greetings from Minneapolis. Steve Day says, pissed at Sanders today. How come, Steve? And Bonnie says, hi, everybody. Kay says, hi, all. And Matt Arado says, greetings. Hi, Matt. Russ Coleman says, time for a recount on the McGrath count. I couldn't agree more. I think there's got to be a recount of that. But I wonder whether Charlie Booker will bow to party pressure. I hope he doesn't. Hope he fights it to the end. Kay says, hope everybody's doing good tonight. I think Booker needs a recount. I think we need a recount. I don't believe a thing they do. Especially after the fact that they had only one polling place open in all of Louisville. That was a travesty. Lana says, I smell a rat with this Kentucky count vote. So do I. Me too, Lana. Okay, please share as much as you can, folks. This needs a big audience. I'm afraid I'm competing with a lot of people tonight, but this is pretty. I think it's going to be a pretty good treatment of chapters 3 and 4 of Pavlina's book. And I think that book is very important. Because in a way, the job guarantee is at the heart of the MMT transformation of society. So here we are. I'll start sharing the book. Start sharing the screen, rather. And in doing so, sharing the book. We are, as I said, now on chapter 3, which is entitled The Job Guarantee, a new social contract and macroeconomic model. And Pav starts off by saying, how does one raise the roof without first securing the floor? This was the question behind FDR's Economic Bill of Rights, the Civil Rights March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, and the Green New Deal's insistence that a green transformation requires basic economic security for all. The more affluent an economy becomes, argued the late John Kenneth Galbraith, Jamie Galbraith's father, the more repugnant the idea that some people get to enjoy the fruits of their labor, while others are left behind without employment. And while the right to a good job was not guaranteed in practice during the golden age of the American economy, it was at least common to defend it. By presidential addresses, the Democrat or Republican echoed it while advocating for strengthening labor conditions and using public service for unemployment relief. These ideas and vocabulary were expunged in the post-Reagan era when the triumph of market fundamentalism wreaked havoc on jobs and incomes. Prosperity for working families was no longer a government goal. Economic security and well-being was the domain of the few. So methodical and effective was the assault on labor and employment conditions that even some voices from the left, of the traditional champions of working families, had all but given up on the ambition to guarantee this fundamental right to all. The surrender was accelerated by orthodox economists' insistence that markets should set all prices, including the price of labor, and that the natural rate of unemployment should serve as the bulwark against inflation. Yes, folks, it's neoliberal economic ideology. The ideological turn was complete. Labor and full employment was abandoned, and the very popular idea of a living wage floor was severely undermined. The rise of monetarism and the mythical Nairu provided the perfect cover for sacrificing jobs on the altar of price and stability. That passage, by the way, was very, very well written. None of this was rooted in good economics. Business enterprises and governments set most prices, the former with increasingly vast market power, and the latter with the power of the public purse. This is well understood in the immediate post-war era, when the government, the budgetary and regulatory apparatus was the primary inflation management tool. For self-respecting economists, few self-respecting economists and policymakers argued that unemployment was necessary to fight inflation. Hayek and Milton Friedman were notable exceptions. The dominant narrative during the Golden Age was that the government was responsible for providing a basic labor standard, from pay and working conditions to national labor relations. But without the right to decent employment, the foundations on which early labor laws were built were weak. The threat of the sack loomed in every negotiation between unions and firms. It justified job outsourcing and the hiring of cheap labor, actually migrant labor, broke the post-war social contract, eroded workplace solidarity, and was used to bust unions themselves. The threat of unemployment remained forever the most powerful tool firms had over their workers. The job guarantee is the missing piece of the Roosevelt revolution. By securing a fundamental economic right, it would usher in a new social contract, pledging that the unemployment and poorly paid employment would no longer be used for the purposes of presumed economic stabilization. Like every major policy of the past, it too would bring significant structural changes to the economy, the most significant of which would be forever exiling the Nairu from the economic policy kit. As a major macroeconomic policy, the job guarantee would provide the counter-cyclical economic stabilization that unemployment currently serves. As a policy that guarantees a basic job at a basic wage, it would provide a minimum labor standard for all jobs in the economy, including an uncompromising living wage floor with potentially far-reaching benefits for all people, working or not. As a permanent feature of the safety net, it would act as a critical preventative policy, foiling a range of social and economic ills and labor market problems. As the cornerstone of a revived economic Bill of Rights and the Green Agenda, it would be an instrument for tackling pressing social and economic problems. The next section is entitled Guarantees All Around, Public Options and Price Supports. While folklore tells us there are no guarantees in life, in fact, Guarantees are everywhere. Most are provided courtesy of the public sector. Some are universal, while others are conditional. Public education, public libraries, public safety, public defenders are just a few of the universal guarantees. Social Security ensures a retirement income subject to some earning history, though people with disabilities and non-working spouses are also covered. Guarantees extend not only to families, but to corporations as well. Contracts with guaranteed profits are widespread globally, often benefiting defense, transportation, and high-tech industries. So are loan guarantees, explicit or implicit, where the government promises to assume the debt of a borrower in trouble. But the 2008 financial bailout is the most extravagant post-war example. Bank deposits are guaranteed via deposit insurance up to a certain amount, and a plethora of government programs around the world guarantee minimum prices for farm commodities. Some of these guarantees come via public options, others via good old-fashioned government price support. With public options, the government directly provides the essential good or service to ensure universal access, e.g., public schools, public roads, public safety. With price supports, it guarantees the price of a good or service never falls below a certain level. For example, bank deposits or some agricultural commodities. The job guarantee has the features of a public option and the benefits of a price support scheme. As a public option, it guarantees universal but voluntary access to a basic public service employment opportunity to anyone who wants one. It is similar to the way individuals are guaranteed a public defender if they choose not to hire a private one, or the way families are guaranteed a seat in a public school even if they opt to send their kids to a private school instead. Since the job guarantee provides a fixed base wage, it also serves as a price support policy, not only for workers in the program, but also for all workers in the economy. This is because it acts as an alternative to the most undesirable private sector jobs, those with poor pay, abuse, harassment, wage theft, dangerous workplaces, and other problems, thereby establishing the minimum required pay and working conditions for all employers to meet. The next section is entitled Price Supports, Buffer Stocks, and Living Wages. The notion that an essential resource in the economy, working people, should enjoy some form of a guarantee and price support is hardly a radical proposition. We do it on a regular basis and effectively for all sorts of inputs of production as a matter of both principle and economic efficiency. One may think of the minimum wage as the price floor for workers, but without the guarantee of employment, it is not entirely effective. So long as there is a shortage of jobs, the wage of the person who cannot secure a minimum wage employment opportunity is in fact zero. Consider how price supports work for agricultural commodities. Governments around the world have employed a range of methods for setting and stabilizing commodity prices. Often this was done via so-called buffer stock programs, where the government would purchase the surplus production of the commodity, say corn, at a predetermined price when demand suddenly fell, and then release it for sale from storage once demand for the commodity recovered. Buffer stock programs have the effect of ensuring that the price of the commodity does not fall below the government-administered price. By purchasing the surplus and selling it when there is a market shortage, the government both employs the commodity, i.e. ensures that no bushel of corn goes unsold, and also maintains its price floor. When it comes to employment, the government has instituted a federal minimum wage, but not a comparable program for purchasing the surplus, so to speak, for employing the unemployed. This means that the government price support policy, the minimum wage, is rather weak, as it does not extend to the unemployed. To establish a robust wage floor, the government needs both a fixed base wage policy and a policy that would employ the unemployed on standby at that predetermined wage. The job guarantee would act as an employment buffer stock scheme with the added benefit that it stabilizes the wage floor, overall prices, and the economy as a whole. Mass layoffs and recessions depress worker wages and total demand, putting downward pressure on all prices. By employing the unemployed, the public option would maintain full employment at living wages, ensuring a much more robust floor to collapsing aggregate demand than in conditions of chronic unemployment. When the economy recovers and firms resume hiring, workers would transition from the job guarantee program into private sector employment. Government spending and payrolls would shrink, relieving any potential inflationary pressures from private sector hiring and the increased demand. This counter-cyclical feature of the program, offsetting changes in private sector demand for workers, would stabilize both economic and price fluctuations. It can be strengthened by training, credentialing, and other efforts to transition job guarantee workers to better paid employment opportunities. In other words, the job guarantee would provide an economy-wide living wage floor, true full employment, and a powerful shock absorber for the economy. Setting the most important price. There is another buffer stock program of the past that almost everyone knows of, that of gold. Recall that under a gold standard, a nation pegs its currency to given ounces of gold. Under such a monetary system, the government effectively sets a fixed price for gold and buys or sells it at that price whenever private demand for gold drops or increases, respectively. In other words, the government uses a buffer stock mechanism to ensure the full employment and price stability of gold. It is indefensible on both economic and moral grounds to have run full employment and price support programs for agricultural commodities or gold without doing the same for job seekers. Working people, for reasons that should be obvious, need a robust price support more than any other commodity. This was recognized as far back as Adam Smith. Adam Smith, my God. Who argued that labor must, at a minimum, be paid a subsistence wage, an idea that has evolved into the modern living wage concept. Working people need enforceable wage laws, but they also need the assurance of an accessible living wage job option. Grain commodities and gold have enjoyed price supports even as they have no demands over the level of their pay. For most people, living incomes and family sustaining wages are essential for survival, nor do commodities care about the conditions of their employment. They may be stored in silos, left to rot unsold, or locked up in a vault. But individuals and their families experience the mental and physical toll of joblessness and poorly paid employment, and that should command the attention of policymakers. But lastly, a commodity can be stored and sold at a later time, but an unemployed person cannot, quote, store, unquote, their abilities for resale tomorrow. They generally require employment on an ongoing basis, or at least with some certainty, indeed with a guarantee, in order to plan for their family's needs. As Harry Hopkins once observed, people don't eat in the long run. They eat every day, unquote. Then there's better control of inflation and government spending. As the gold and granary examples show, an employment buffer stock would stabilize the price of a most essential resource in the economy, labor, which is an input. It's an input of the production process for any other commodity, thus stabilizing the prices as well. Furthermore, spending on the job guarantee program itself would offset deflationary pressures when it expands in recessions and inflationary pressures when it shrinks in expansions. Thus, it would be a superior inflation control mechanism than unemployment. No doubt there are other sources of inflation, supply shocks, the pricing power of the monopoly firms, imported inflation. But with a job guarantee, government spending on maintaining full employment would not be one of them. The job guarantee would also serve as a superior method for regulating the government's full employment budget. Compare the program to current practice. How many contracts would a government need to provide to firms? And how high a profit should they guarantee to nudge corporations to hire all job seekers, including the long-term unemployed? What would it take to induce them to raise the wages of their low-wage workers? How many subsidies and how many tax incentives? There is no limit to the budget that would be necessary to coax firms to ensure full employment. Remember, firms are not in the business of hiring every person who seeks work. With a job guarantee, we know the amount of government spending required to maintain full employment, not a dollar more than what would be needed to hire the last person who showed up at the unemployment office. The job guarantee by itself would not eliminate no-bid contracts to firms, but by ensuring they are not the go-to policies for full employment, it would better regulate government spending on job creation. And if price pressures came from other parts of the government's budget policy, for example, directing spending to industries already operating at capacity, then policy would need to deal with these sources of inflation. This is not the place to discuss what a comprehensive agenda for inflation management might look like, but the main message is this: laying off workers is not the answer. Next section is on automatic stabilizers, guaranteed employment, or guaranteed unemployment. And this brings to us the ultimate choice. In the universe of macroeconomic stabilization policies, there are only two options. Either we continue to rely on the existing unemployment stabilizer, or we replace it with an employment stabilizer. That's the choice. Which is best? That's what this section is about. The job guarantee is the latter, a living wage employment program that expands and shrinks with changes in economic conditions. And it can be paired with any other program that may be considered desirable for other reasons. Recently, there's been a resurgence in interest in beefing up automatic stabilizers. There are many. Public policies that deal with some aspect of economic insecurity often have counter-cyclical features. For example, Medicaid, food and housing assistance, even Social Security, as families increasingly tap these programs when unemployment rises. Without the job guarantee, all counter-cyclical policies, however weak or strong, by necessity, continue to use unemployment to soften economic fluctuations. Policy packages that do not include a job guarantee need to justify why they require involuntary unemployment, however large or small, as a permanent feature of the economy. In other words, she's saying that the present practices of keeping an unemployment buffer stock, a buffer stock of the involuntarily unemployed, that policy choice has to be justified because we've kept it as a permanent feature of the economy, and many people have suffered continuously because of that particular policy choice. So we are right to ask, why is it better to have an automatic stabilizer full of unemployed people as opposed to an automatic stabilizer full of employed people? In some, Pavlina says, government guarantees in the form of public options and price support schemes are quite common. By combining the best features of both, the job guarantee absolves the policymaker from having to choose between unemployment and inflation. Full employment would be maintained over the long run by providing dignified living wage job opportunities on standby, while the counter-cyclical behavior of the program and its robust wage floor would stabilize prices and the economy. The job guarantee is the antidote to the NIRU. Next section is on prevention, not just cure. The job guarantee does not just cure unemployment. It has important preventative features as well. First, it frustrates the explosive nature of mass layoffs. Without a job guarantee, any policy to tackle unemployment, stimulus, tax cuts, income support, always arrives too little and too late. While the avalanche of job losses is well underway. That when the job guarantee provides employment opportunities to the newly unemployed on standby, it tempers the human yo-yo effect discussed in Chapter 2. Without a job guarantee, mass layoffs are by reinforcing. Unemployment insurance, by UI, and temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, for example, help put a floor on collapsing demand, but they do not deal with the psychological effects of uncertain job prospects. Families who count on small and short-lived unemployment benefits cut their spending much more drastically than families who know that a living wage job option is just around the corner. The job guarantee also prevents people from slipping unwittingly into long-term unemployment, reducing the resulting individual scarring effects and economic problems. As we also discussed in Chapter 2, the social and economic costs of unemployment are so large that creating jobs as a method of inoculation is a worthwhile goal. And so it is. Why would you not want to do that? These preventative benefits are especially important to states during Nixon's new federalism through a set of policies that were expanded and accelerated by Reagan. The federal government transferred many of its responsibilities for social programs to states. This devolution was adopted on the pretext of allowing for greater state autonomy and flexibility. Yes, we have the same thing going on with Trump right now, don't we? Let the states handle it. Let them take the responsibility. Why should the federal government take the responsibility? Well, maybe because the federal government has the currency power and can afford to spend whatever has to be spent in order to get us out of the coronavirus and its attendant problems, both health and economic. But as we will discuss in the next chapter, it turned out to be excessively burdensome to states, just as handling the coronavirus is excessively burdensome to states right now, isn't it? And Pavlina points out the states are not in a state of monetary sovereignty, and they do not have the fiscal power of the federal government to support such programs. Worse, the immediate result was a reduction in benefits with the consolidation of categorical grants into block grants, making it more difficult for states to guarantee access to essential public services. Adding insult to injury, in the 1990s, states passed the balanced budget, which necessitated further program cuts, often precisely when they were most needed in recessions. On the chopping block were usually programs like Meals for the Hungry, child care for low-income earners, and other welfare programs. Yes, always the first to get cut on the welfare programs. With a federally funded job guarantee program, states would experience significant budget relief at all times, but especially in downturns, as the program would reduce the demands on states for social expenditures. States would still retain their autonomy in designing, implementing, and administering the program. More on this in the next chapter, but they would not have to rely on race to the bottom interstate competition to extend expensive subsidies to firms in exchange for little job creation. The next section is called the labor standard and a new social contract. The job guarantee forges a new social contract by establishing a labor standard for good jobs. What good is a job if it pays poverty wages? The task before us is to eliminate both unemployment and poverty-paying jobs. One of the aims of the job guarantee is to rethink what constitutes a dignified labor standards, i.e., the minimum acceptable living pay, benefits, working hours, and conditions for any working person, and institute this as a program feature. Another is to put an end to the business practice of paying starvation wages. Absolutely. The road to establishing a labor standard has been long. When FDR called on Frances Perkins to serve as labor secretary, she agreed on the condition that he would support a federal minimum wage, a reduction in the working week, and a revitalized public service employment program, among other groundbreaking pieces of legislation. The 40-hour work week she helped pass was a compromise. The very popular earlier bill for 30 hours was narrowly defeated. Wouldn't it have been wonderful if that bill was passed? What a difference that would have made over the years, right? Fantastic impacts on all our lives if we had a 30-hour work week. The minimum wage also did not extend to all workers. But today it does not supply a living standard either. The equally popular campaign for $15 an hour has made slow legislative progress at the state level. While a full 40% of working people in the United States earn below that rate, federal action that extends beyond strengthening labor laws or raising the minimum wage is required. Job guarantee would help secure a true minimum wage for the economy as a whole. As noted, below poverty wage jobs would face competition from the living wage public option, and firms would be pressured to meet this standard when they hire. Some worry that this feature of the program would attract millions of currently employed low-wage workers from the private sector. But there is little reason to fear such an exodus because firms necessarily respond to meet the new standards. Firms will regularly match newly mandated wages as a result of local living wage ordinances and would do the same in the case of a job guarantee. And as Amazon demonstrated recently, largely because it was shamed into raising its wages to $15 an hour. They can do so literally overnight. Second, it is not reasonable to expect that companies facing wage competition from the job guarantee would shut down their stores. Families would continue to eat at fast food restaurants and shop at Walmart or Home Depot. More likely, the new income would create stronger demand and more favorable economic conditions, raising firms' incomes and profits. This would help them match the job guarantee wage and increase employment. The research on the minimum wage is clear. Wage increases do not cost jobs. Recent research on the job guarantee also models these effects. I'm summarizing the next chapter and finds that far from creating an exodus, the job guarantee permanently increases growth and employment in the private sector. For southern states with already low minimum wages and higher than average poverty and unemployment rates, $15 per hour job guarantee wage would be an effective development strategy by raising incomes, employment, and demand much faster proportionately than in states with higher wages and employment. States or cities could still choose to supplement the job guarantee minimum wage as they do with living wage ordinances today. Finally, the job guarantee could help lower the working week standard if it offered full-time pay and benefits for 35 hours of work per week. For example, Germany and France already employ a 35-hour working week, and unions in Germany recently got it reduced to 28 hours for millions of workers. Boon to the service sector. This new labor standard would be especially beneficial to service sector workers. The vast majority of workers who would transition to private sector employment from the job guarantee would take up service sector jobs. As manufacturing today employs less than 8% of the total labor force of the U.S. A decline in manufacturing employment is a global trend, and even manufacturing giants like China and South Korea cannot count on this sector to maintain previous levels of employment. We often think with nostalgia about the manufacturing jobs, longing for the family security they provided and the communities they engendered. But it is easy to forget that manufacturing jobs were precarious and underpaid until organized labor succeeded in actually by unionizing them, and governments legislated for workplace safety, working hour limits, and minimum wages. Those changes were far-reaching but still inadequate. They depended on the mutual expectations and obligations between workers and employers over labor conditions. The social contract, which ushered in family wages for men, but only, quote, pin money, unquote, for women, is now long gone, and service sector work does not provide comparable wage support and living standards. Yet the overwhelming majority of jobs in the economy are what we could broadly call care work. That is, service sector employment that deals with nurturing and reproducing society. We transport ourselves, feed and clothe ourselves, entertain ourselves, and educate and heal ourselves. But many of these jobs are undervalued and underpaid. How can we do for service jobs what we once did for manufacturing jobs? The minimum wage and work safety laws are not enough. The job guarantee offers a different contract with the American public. Multinational corporations today have no incentive to do what Ford once did, to raise worker pay to boost purchasing power and demand for the products the corporation makes. As a structural policy, the living wage public option for jobs actually provides the incentive. It puts corporations' feet to the fire and requires that if they wish to do business in a country that has implemented a job guarantee, they must at least match the program's pay. Actually, they have to beat the program's pay. One may wonder whether corporations would respond by simply outsourcing more jobs to low-wage countries. However, the service sector employs nearly 80% of all workers in the U.S., and most service sector jobs cannot be outsourced easily. Call centers and some accounting services may be, but schools, grocery stores, restaurants, transportation, home repair services, health clinics, dialysis centers, retirement homes, golf courses, and theaters cannot be shipped abroad, nor are they being radically automated. The primary threat hanging over workers in the sector is not outsourcing or automation, but downsizing, pay cuts, harassment, benefit loss, or other difficult working conditions employers create in the race to cut costs. Workers have no power to say no to a bad job unless they're guaranteed the option of a good job with decent pay. A very key statement, I think. Other benefits: transition, pre-distribution, and the safety net. While the job guarantee establishes the wage benefit floor private employers have to meet, it would also serve as a job placement program. It would allow people to transition from unemployment to employment and from the job guarantee to other private, public, or nonprofit work. It would train and prepare them for other employment opportunities via on-the-job training, education, other wraparound services, and credentialing. A job guarantee could be especially helpful to young people having trouble securing their first job, inmates looking for work, the long-term unemployed with significant barriers to re-employment, and caregivers who may wish to return to the labor market. Could be a stepping stone to other opportunities. Still, the private sector would not hire everyone, even when every effort has been made to transition as many people as possible out of the public program. The job guarantee would continue to provide an ongoing employment safety net for the rest. The economy living wage floor would give to millions of families a significant pay raise. It would help reduce income inequality, as wages at the bottom would rise faster than those at the top. The job guarantee would use pre-distribution to help tackle inequality by boosting employment and the labor share of income, and by generating more socially useful output. To be sure, it is not a panacea to run away inequality, and policies to address the increasing concentration of wealth and incomes at the top would also be needed. The job guarantee would help strengthen other aspects of the social safety net. Comprehensive programs like Social Security, for example, still have trouble providing universal coverage. Although about 4% of people would never receive Social Security benefits, 95% of them are individuals whose earnings history are insufficient to qualify them for the program. The poverty rate of infrequent earners on Social Security is 57%. The job guarantee would provide them with the option of continuous work to qualify for Social Security, and the possibility of transitioning to employment opportunities that provide more generous retirement support. The job guarantee could also strengthen education policies and immigration reform. Macmillan Cottom has argued that it could be the single best educational reform because it would increase the returns to education for all students, and especially students of color, ensuring that desperation no longer shaped working families' choices. With respect to immigration reform, the job guarantee would provide employment opportunities to dreamers who are protected under deferred action for childhood arrivals under DACA. DACA recipients are allowed to obtain driver's licenses, enroll in college, and legally secure jobs. But the job guarantee would ensure that the jobs are readily available. With additional legislation, program participation could be a path to citizenship for dreamers, parents, and other undocumented immigrants. Now, the safety net is designed to provide economic security for those who work and for those who do not. The job guarantee is a program for working families that complements other forms of income support. People with disabilities, caregivers, students, and the retired all need economic security, and other policies could be passed or existing policies strengthened to address their needs. Generous disability and caregiver assistance, also universal child allowance, student debt relief, tuition-free public college, and a living retirement income are just a few. Still, the job guarantee is designed to improve the lives of non-workers as well. This will be discussed in detail in Chapter 5. The program is organized around care and conservation work. It prioritizes the kind of public services that benefit children, the elderly, caregivers, and people with disabilities. It offers internships and transitional job opportunities for graduates. It is coupled with universal, high-quality early child care and after-school activities to alleviate the unpaid care burden of families and the double shift of caregivers who still wish to take up paid work. It can supply Meals on Wheels, companionship, transportation to medical appointments, and other services that could significantly improve the lives of people who do not work. Importantly, surveys show that stay-at-home parents, caregivers, and people with disabilities often want to take paid work for non-financial reasons, but they face significant obstacles to employment. The job guarantee provides the missing employment opportunities along with universal child care and other needed services that are wraparound services. The ambition of the job guarantee is to transform the macroeconomic stabilization model, to provide environmentally sustainable public service employment opportunities on demand, and secure an unapologetic living wage standard for all. As we will discuss in the next chapter, the obstacles to reaching this goal are not financial. So that was a short chapter. Next, which I think was very well written, right, and very much a driving chapter in terms of outlining what the job guarantee program can do. I thought just reading it was inspiring. Here's the next, much shorter chapter, though, on how we would pay for it. Quote, but how will you pay for it, unquote, is the most misleading question in politics today, largely because it is predicated on the myth that the U.S. federal government can run out of funding. In fact, it is no longer even a question. It's an objection, a cordon around many policy proposals. Politicians use it to underfund vital programs in the name of artificial debt limits, unjustified pay-go accounting practices, and painful balanced budget amendments. And most economists have not helped much either. Much like it is with the NAIRU, they have prioritized fictitious debt and deficit to GDP ratios over policies in the public interest. I've written an awful lot about that. Boy, have they done that. Cost and budget considerations must rest on the unambiguous understanding that any monetarily sovereign government, like that in the U.S., may run out of real resources, human or natural, but it cannot run out of finance. Accordingly, answering the question of how to pay for the job guarantee is much easier than addressing, quote, how to implement it and make it workable, to be addressed in the next chapter. Here we tackle the, quote, pay for, unquote, question in three ways. One, by examining the nature of the monetary system and the power of the public purpose. Two, by comparing spending on the job guarantee to existing unemployment fighting policies. And three, by offering specific job guarantee budget estimates and criteria for effective financing over the long run. The next section is on monetary systems and the power of the public purse, which is the first area just named by Pavlina. There is an important economic reason why large-scale safety nets, public options, price support schemes, and other guarantees are normally the responsibility of the federal government. This is because the buck stops, or more precisely starts, with the state, but literally. Every government around the world has the exclusive privilege of issuing and controlling its own currency, even if some nations abdicate this by prerogative. The significance of this basic and undeniable fact is almost universally ignored. It gives a government its monetary sovereignty, its unqualified and flexible spending power to fund its economic affairs. Articulating the nature of monetary sovereignty is at the heart of an economic approach known as the modern monetary theory, or MMT, that has attracted global attention. While an exposition of MMT is beyond the scope of this book, but of course not Stephanie's book, as we know, its main message is clear enough and critical. The currency is a simple public monopoly, a creature of government and a public good that is already being issued and spent into existence when the government finances its policy priorities. The public intuitively understands this. We regularly witness the U.S. government immediately, quote, finding the money, unquote, when it finances bank bailouts, billionaire tax cuts, or endless wars. No borrowing from China, no robbing of our unborn grandchildren, no cap-in-hand tax collections from wealthy households are called upon to fund these initiatives. Congress votes for the programs, Congress appropriates the budget, and issues the check with which the Federal Reserve then clears. Actually, I don't know if that's the case. Congress votes for the programs and appropriates the budget, all right, but it's the Treasury that issues the checks or the orders to send wires, which the Federal Reserve then clears. So that it's not quite right that Congress issues the check. That has been delegated to the executive branch, which I'm sure Pavlina knows very well. And no U.S. government checks bounce ever. That is true because the U.S. government does not issue checks until it has the reserves covering the checks in the Treasury spending account. Now, it may conclude contracts before it has the reserves in the Treasury spending accounts. It concludes the contracts based on the appropriations. It orders the work based on the appropriations. But it doesn't send the checks until the reserve level in the Treasury spending account is enough. To put it another way, government spending supplies the economy with currency, while tax payments move some of it into circulation. Now, the latter has the effect of offsetting any potential inflationary impact of the spending. Taxes also have important distributional and incentive effects, but in a world of fiat floating sovereign currencies, they do not, quote, pay for, unquote, federal government spending as conventionally understood. This was clearly articulated by New York Fed Chairman Beardsley Ruml in an important 1946 article entitled, quote, Taxes for Revenue are Obsolete, unquote, as well as by Fed Chair Ben Bernanke in the aftermath of the Great Financial Crisis. After Congress had appropriated a budget in September 2008 and authorized the Fed to purchase hundreds of billions of dollars of non-performing bank assets, Bernanke clarified, quote, it's not taxpayer money. We simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account. Well, you've heard this again and again from MNTers like myself and Stephanie Kelton, of course, and Pavlina and Warren Mosler simply use the computer to mark up the size of the account. It's important to recognize, though, that the chair people of the Federal Reserve who said similar things, okay, such as Ben Bernanke, are not MMT economists, but they are giving you their understanding of what the heads of the agency, the heads of the Federal Reserve, think is being done to fund the actions of the Fed and the actions of the government. The Fed is simply using the computer to mark up the size of the account. These very same funding powers extend to all spheres of the public purpose. Guaranteeing full employment at stable prices is at the top of the list of public benefits. Indeed, the exclusive privilege to spend its own resource, i.e. the currency, gives the government the exclusive responsibility to do so in a way that ensures economic security for all. The ability of a monetarily sovereign government to guarantee its public options over the long run depends not on the availability of finance, but on the availability of real resources. As Alan Greenspan said in the famous quote that was detailed in Stephanie's book that we just reviewed. So long as there are unemployed resources for sale in the domestic currency, the government can always afford to employ them. Paying for the job guarantee would mean that the currency put into circulation through the program is always backed by some concrete, socially useful work. That's what the currency is really backed by. Concrete, socially useful work. And sometimes, in the case of much of the private sector work, not socially useful work, if I may be allowed to say so. I don't know how useful market research is, for example. Understanding this changes everything, from the economic possibilities before us to what the public can rightfully demand from its government. Some countries relinquish this fundamental sovereign power, for example, when they join monetary unions, and as a consequence surrender a most essential public function to guarantee certain aspects of the social safety net, from bank deposits to social insurance to default risk-free government debt. The question then is not how to pay for job guarantee, what the specific economic consequences are, okay, of implementing it. It is thus useful to separate the real from the financial costs of the program and compare them to the real and financial costs of continuing with the unemployment status quo. On both counts, the job guarantee is superior. And then Pavlina goes into real versus financial costs, okay, and benefits. If a monetarily sovereign government is not financially constrained, how then do we evaluate what is money well spent? A very important question, I think. What criteria shall we use to ensure that public money is effectively employed for the public good? One criterion would be to consider the relative employment effects of different government job creation policies, the proverbial bang for the buck, but in terms of net new jobs. Another would be to consider the job guarantee's ability to reduce the existing long-term costs of unemployment, both real and financial. A third criterion would be the budget's ability to move anti-cyclically or counter-cyclically, shrinking in an inflationary environment and expanding in a deflationary environment while maintaining full employment. Consider the stabilization effects undertaken in the aftermath of the great financial crisis through the Through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009, Congress appropriated $848 billion to be spent over 4 years to resuscitate the economy. By official estimates, sorry, by official estimates, this stimulus created or saved on average, between 1.3 million and 4.7 million jobs per year from 2009 to 2012. A dismal result when official unemployment during that time averaged between 12.5 and 15 million people per year, and using the expanded definition, of unemployment, the U3 definition of unemployment, peaked at 30 million. Is that the U3 definition of unemployment? Let me check. Archive of Monthly Unemployment Data, National Jobs for All Coalition Jobs and Job Security. So we'd have to look at that to see what was meant by it. The $848 billion budget was quite conventional. It prioritized tax cuts, extended unemployment insurance and other income support, and offered subsidies and contracts to firms. Had there been a job guarantee program in place, the budget would have been sufficient to create 20 million wage jobs, including a generous allowance for materials and benefits, wiping out the entire official and some of the hidden unemployment. It is more than likely the government would not have ended up employing all 20 million people had it gotten the ball rolling and started hiring the unemployed directly. It would have halted the avalanche of layoffs. Remember, in early 2009, the economy was losing on average 750,000 jobs per month. It would have launched a job-led recovery, encouraging firms to resume their own hiring. This direct employment approach would have averted the most protracted jobless recovery in post-war history. Could the government have funded a larger stimulus in 2009? No doubt. Would a doubling or tripling of the recovery package have helped speed up the recovery? Surely. Would a larger government deficit have created a job for everyone who wanted one? Unlikely, as we discussed in Chapter 3. There are many reasons why firms do not hire all the unemployed even in good times, and there is no limit to the amount of government spending that would be required to persuade them to do so in the depths of the recession. The job guarantee, by contrast, ensures that every person who shows up at the unemployment office is hired. It provides stronger counter-cyclical stabilization for a relatively smaller full employment budget, i.e. spending per job created, than the conventional stimulus approach, and a firmer cap on government spending for the purposes of securing full employment. Tax cuts and subsidies are widely used in normal times as well. Federal subsidies to industries are in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Some support prices and profits, e.g. in the agricultural or financial sectors. Others promote the private provisioning of essential public goods, for example, in healthcare or education, but many are given with the explicit attempt to stimulate employment. As a job creation tool, subsidies are especially problematic for states which are not monetarily sovereign like the federal government. Cross-border subsidy competition among states deprives them of needed tax revenue, whereas the job creation effect is small. Studies show that these state tax subsidies and similar ones for cities primarily shift jobs from one state to another. A federally funded job guarantee not only produces the highest primary, secondary, and induced employment effects, it also frees states from engaging in an arms race to retain businesses and attract firms from other states. Very important. To end the race to the bottom among the states. Very, very important. As Chapter 2 documented, unemployment is expensive and already paid for. Its large social and economic costs compound and multiply the longer we tolerate it. Any spending on the job guarantee would be both an investment in our human and natural resources and a form of inoculation against the major social costs of unemployment. Consider mass incarceration in the United States. The average annual cost per inmate in 2015 was over 33,000. That is the equivalent of one living wage job with benefits per adult for a household with two working adults and two children. In many states, the cost per inmate is much higher, sometimes twice the national average. At the same time, the barriers to employment for individuals with a criminal record are very high, while the link between unemployment and recidivism is well established. Total public spending on incarceration has been soaring without reducing recidivism. Yet jobs programs for former inmates have proven to drastically reduce rates of reoffending. Simultaneously, dismally paid prison labor is used to perform essential functions. For example, California pays inmates $2 a day and $1 per hour to fight its raging wildfires, displacing regular public sector employees. This is but one example of direct financial and real costs of unemployment. In virtually all corners of the economy, one can find examples of the government allocating significant resources to deal with socioeconomic and environmental adversities, homelessness, poverty, floods, pollution, instead of focusing on common sense prevention and rehabilitation, building homes, actually providing jobs, fortifying the infrastructure. The power of the public purse prescribes that the fiscally responsible approach would be to pay for unemployment and renewal instead of neglect and privation. The job guarantee budget. Estimates of the direct government expenditures on the job guarantee would depend on the state of the economy because private sector employment moves cyclically. The job guarantee will necessarily move countercyclically, as the next chapter discusses. Real-world examples show such countercyclical features. Therefore, its budget must be designed to accommodate such fluctuations. To estimate the budget for the program, put some numbers on its impact on the economy. A research team at the Levy Economics Institute simulated a very ambitious program for the United States with the following characteristics. The research team was comprised of Randy Ray, Pavlina, Stephanie Kelton, Scott Fulweiler, I think also Marshall Steinbaum, but I'm not sure about that. The job guarantee wage is $15 per hour. Non-labor costs are 25% above the labor costs. Benefits, healthcare, childcare, and paid leave are an additional 20% of the wage bill. Workers in the program work an average of 32 hours per week, choosing between full and part-time opportunities. In other words, people can work a 40-hour week if they want to work a 40-hour week. Other people might want to work only a 20-hour week. So the average comes to 32 hours per week. Job guarantee workers pay the employee's portion of payroll taxes. A third of all income generated by the job guarantee is subject to federal income taxes. No additional taxes are levied to offset the program costs. The job guarantee is simulated using the well-established and stock flow consistent FAIR model for the United States. The program is implemented at the start of 2018 and is fully phased in over 12 months. Of course, it would now not be started until sometime in 2021 and would not be fully phased in for 12 months at that time. The simulation evaluates its impact on growth, private sector employment, poverty, state budgets, and inflation over a 10-year period. It also estimates the program's gross expenditures and net impact on the budget. Table 2 provides summary statistics for the low and high bound scenarios, both of which make conservative assumptions about the amount of tax receipts to be generated from the program and the expected savings on the Medicaid and the earned income tax credit. The model does not account for any additional government savings on anti-poverty programs. The intent is to simulate the budgetary costs and economic effects of a very large and ambitious job guarantee program. So there is a table. The lower bound of employment in 2022 would be 11.6 million. The high bound would be 15.4 million employed in the program. The average job guarantee employment thereafter would be 11.1 million as a lower bound per year, and 14.7 million as an upper bound. The peak yearly contribution to real GDP would be 472 billion as a lower bound and 593 billion as an upper bound. Average contribution to real GDP thereafter would be 440 billion versus 543 billion. Peak increases in private sector employment would be 3.3 million as opposed to 4.2 million. Average increase in private sector employment thereafter 2.93 million versus 3.65 million. Increase in inflation 0.63% in 2020, declining to 0.11%. Peak 0.74% in 2020, declining to 0.09%. Thereafter, improvement in state budgets would be 35 billion, and the maximum would be 55 billion. Average direct spending on the program would be 409 billion versus 543 billion. And this is from 2020 to 2027. The average net impact on the budget would be 247.5 billion, or it would be a maximum of 340 billion. The budgetary impact as a percent of GDP would be 0.98%, at a minimum of less than 1% of GDP, or 1.33% of GDP as a maximum. With conservative assumptions about the potential savings, the budgetary impact in the higher bound scenario is less than 1.5% of GDP per year. It is plausible that if we accounted for all reductions in government sector spending on unemployment, along with all the positive social and economic multipliers, the program's budget impact would be neutral, though this would not be a criterion for success, since in deep downturns the government would normally need to increase its deficit spending, says Pavlina. Additionally, we find that one full-time job guarantee worker per family would lift a family of 5 and 9.5 million children out of poverty, or about 63% of all poor children in the United States. With one full-time and one part-time job guarantee worker per family, the program would lift a family of 8 and 12.4 million children out of poverty, or approximately 83% of all poor children. Comparing the robust effects on the macroeconomy and modest reductions in existing costs, the estimated job guarantee budget is surprisingly small. In simulation, this large program employs at its peak between 11.6 and 15.4 million people, raises wages for the entire economy, including private firms, to $15 an hour, also provides generous benefits, and allocates 25% of its expenditures to non-labor costs. As a consequence, it boosts real GDP by nearly $500 billion and increases private sector employment by 3 to 4 million jobs without generating any inflationary effect of macroeconomic significance, all for a net effect on the budget of about 1 to 1.3% of GDP. This is money well spent. Federal governments that provide public options, price supports, and other public guarantees, not only because they have been charged with the welfare of their citizens, but also because they hold the exclusive power of the public purse. Only a monetary sovereign government can ensure the ongoing funding for the public options on which its citizens depend. Currently, we use the power of the public purpose to finance an unemployment regime, a rather dysfunctional and fiscally irresponsible way of using that power. The job guarantee proposes we use our monetary sovereignty to finance an employment regime, a full employment regime, actually. And so here are the notes, and that takes us beyond the fourth chapter, and I think it makes clear that it is far more beneficial to have a job guarantee policy and a buffer stock of fully employed people than it is to continue on with the buffer stock of unemployed people that we maintain right now. And further, we have to consider that during the COVID-19 economic crisis, we very, very badly need such a job guarantee. If we passed one tomorrow, and we could easily handle the impact on the budget. I mean, look, the federal government just appropriated $2.2 trillion in funds for the CARES Act. This would have an impact of $343 billion a year on the budget of the United States, and everyone would be fully employed, would be fully covered at a living wage. Everyone put out of a job by COVID-19 would have a living wage, full employment, if they wanted full employment. If they were interested in part-time employment, they could have that. Many of these jobs would be designed so people could stay home. Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? But we'll see more about that tomorrow. We go into chapter 5. What, where, and how. The jobs, okay, the design, okay, and the implementation. And that is going to be very stunning when we get into it. But I've covered chapters 3 and 4 today. That's all I will cover. But I think you can see this is the centerpiece of the MMT program from a policy point of view. We'll see more tomorrow as we see how it deals with green jobs as well as other jobs. But we're talking about transforming the economy into an economy of care, an economy of service, an economy of sustainability. And we're talking about doing that for an incredibly low price, far less than the money wasted on the $2.2 trillion CARES Act. Now, since that money was created by an act of the federal government, and there's no need to take money out of the economy to fund it, I'm not going to say the money from the CARES Act was entirely wasted. That's not really the point. The point is, for far less spending, we could already have bailed everybody out who needed to be bailed out and who did not have a place in businesses that still are operating or could operate with federal assistance. So we could have supplied all the federal assistance that was necessary, spent far less than the $2.2 trillion spent on the CARES Act, and spent on the job guarantee program. And we would have had a lot left over for more robust social safety net spending during the time of the coronavirus. So please keep that in mind until next time. When we go into the jobs, design, and implementation, and into the finale of the book. And now I'm going to turn to your comments, if I may. Okay. Hope you've been sharing this. Okay. Matt says that market fundamentalism is an ideological cover for the oligarchy. Competitive markets are anathema to oligarchs because they would kill their profits, and their market power. It's true. It's true, but we don't have competitive markets. And we can only reconstruct them with a great deal, of difficulty. Steve Wolfbrand says, yes, Booker was robbed. Kay says, I think so too, Steve. Steve Wolfbrand, after all the outrageous voter suppression, and election fraud we saw against Sanders, is there any doubt? Matt says we need to create a system of free and fair elections, as priority number one. It is the only way to change a society in a nonviolent manner. I'm sorry, Matt, but I think that we can't create a system of free and fair elections except by getting the legislature to act. That is absolutely essential. And are we going to be able to do that in an entirely nonviolent manner? We've been trying to do it in a nonviolent manner. And as people try to do it through protests and through demonstrations, we have police all over the country who try their best through using violence themselves, but to provoke violence from the protesters. They're violating civil rights and civil liberties for the purpose of turning the protesters to violence. They know that most of the protesters who are out there have not been trained in nonviolent techniques. They're not like the civil rights protesters of the 1960s. This is not what we have here. This is more like the protesters of the late 60s. So it is our priority number one. But there is a conundrum here. How are we going to get this in a nonviolent manner? And how long is it going to take us? And will the time period be so long that we won't be able to do anything about the climate crisis before it's too late? Steve Day says, that's the lies we've been taught, on economics. And Steve Wolfbrand says, Europe no longer wants us to go there. Guess we're officially a shithole country. They don't want us to go there any longer because they can't trust that we won't come with disease. Rick says also labor and costs of labor are not true supply and demand. Walmart and other employers sent the labor simply because they are monopolistic. Absolutely. They set the price of labor because they are monopolistic, because they drove all the small businesses out of the various towns across the United States, and we allowed it to happen. They drove them out through unfair competition, through price cutting. And they were able to do the price cutting because they were able to exploit the Chinese labor on the other end. That is what happened. And Matt says, social change is far too slow. We're still trying to implement ideas of justice that are hundreds of years old. That's right, Matt. So can somebody give me Joe Biden's counter-argument to a federal job guarantee? He doesn't have counter-arguments for anything that make any good sense. He's not about argument. He's about assertion, and he's about saying, I'm not going to do this. I'm not for this. I'm not going to do this. I'm for that. Why? He doesn't know why. He's not going to tell us why. He hasn't told us why he's against Medicare for all. He's just against Medicare for all. He's for the Affordable Care Act. He hasn't told us why. We know why. We know why. He's got big donors. He's got big donors. His counter argument to a Fed guarantee is going to be nothing. It's going to be, well, if we give people a job, they won't have incentives to go looking for jobs. We'll destroy their incentives to go looking for jobs because we'll be giving them jobs. There'll be make-work jobs. There'll be stupid jobs. There'll be jobs without any value. Just like the jobs of all those consultants working in my campaign to get me elected. Kay says, hey, hell, we're still fighting for rights we won in the 70s at least. Well, it's because we stopped fighting for them in the 70s. We won them initially in the 70s, but we got to hold on to them once we've won them. That means we had to keep going to the streets, and we didn't keep doing that, did we? Steve says, we went to discos instead. Steve says, same as his argument for Medicare for all, too expensive. Yeah, how are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? Same way we paid for COVID. Same way we paid for COVID. We're going to appropriate it. The Congress is going to appropriate it, and then the executive branch will have to spend the money. And when the executive branch runs low on money in the Treasury spending account, it will do one of three things if Congress does nothing. One, it will wait for tax money. It will wait for credits that are deposited by the Federal Reserve into the Treasury spending account after the Federal Reserve settles tax payments, after the Federal Reserve settles deposits to the Treasury account that result from bond auctions, after the Federal Reserve settles the deposits of platinum coins into the Treasury spending account. All those things can be done to fill up the Treasury spending account without Congress doing anything additional. But things would be even easier if, when Congress appropriates the spending, it just mandates that the Federal Reserve will place the money appropriated in the Treasury spending account up front, so the Treasury does not run short and can actually spend what Congress has appropriated. In addition, at the same time, the Congress can mandate that the Fed also mark up the Treasury spending account by the amount that is necessary, but for the Treasury to pay all of the debts falling due within the period of the appropriation, all the Treasury securities falling due, within the period of appropriation, and plus the interest. And if Congress places those two things in the appropriations bill, then that will pay for things. So, how does anybody plan to pay for things? Those are the ways in which things are paid for. Ultimately, what that amounts to is that the Treasury orders that the Federal Reserve will make payments out of its account to pay for the appropriations that have been mandated by the Congress. That's the way We always spend federal money out of the Treasury Department, and we do it exactly the same way in paying for the federal job guarantee. So Matt says, Steve Gonzo, too much money, and they will also make the freedom and choice argument, just like Medicare for all. We can easily answer that argument, but we've got to be truthful about it, that it always happens the same way. And then we can outline what the choices of the executive branch are to top up the Treasury spending account when it's necessary, just like I just did. There's nothing magical about it, and it's all authorized in current law. That's all that's necessary. And Rick Maynard said FDR got a lot done, but even before he was out of office, they started disabling it. And Matt said, how can we get the masses outside of the red-blue box to understand that the fundamental issue, okay, is oligarchy? To some degree, a lot of the masses already understand it. That's one reason why Bernie Sanders was so popular. He told us about oligarchy, and a lot of people believed him. They know it's oligarchy, and they want an end to oligarchy. It just wasn't enough to get him elected in the face of all the cheating. I think if they hadn't been cheating, it would have been enough. Kay says, I don't know, Matthew. The dumbing down project has worked way too well. Matt says, K. Clark Ryan, the last general election, the red-blue split was roughly 62 million to 62 million, but 100 million did not even vote. If we could only organize them. Well, that's what Bernie has been lamenting for years. If we could only organize them. And he tried to organize them, but he failed to organize enough of them to make a difference. Kay says, I think progressive candidates are trying their best, but not sure it will work. Young folks need to get involved big time. So do old folks. I mean, old folks don't know what the hell they're doing. They don't know what the hell they're doing. Too recently, they were supporting Trump in the majority. Insanity. They thought Trump was good for them. He wants to take away everything they have, and these assholes think Trump was good for them, or better for them than Biden was. I mean, I don't think that Biden is very good for them either. I mean, but for God's sakes, Biden is not going to sting Social Security at the first opportunity. He'll make motions that way. He may pass an unfair CPI that gradually makes people poorer, but he's not going to do the kinds of things that Trump would consider doing. He's not going to be as bad for senior people as Trump. No way. And Kay says, voting down ballot progressives is just as important as the president, maybe more important right now. It is now that we can't vote for Bernie anymore. Kay, I hear you. I think it is going to be tough. Every poll has their price. Will AOC start to sound like Mayor Buttigieg in a few years? I don't think AOC will sound like Mayor Pete in a few years. She may be tired a little and tamed a little, but she's not going to sound like Mayor Pete. He's a fucking neoliberal from the get-go. There's no way AOC is going to become a neoliberal. No way. I sure hope not, Matthew. More progressives are elected to support her. I don't think she will. Matt says, yes, there's strength in numbers. It is essential. There needs to be a more progressive voting bloc in Congress. And we may get one this year. There is hope for that, in spite of the fact that it looks like the Booker opportunity is now gone, but maybe not. I hope Charlie insists on a recount. That's very, very important. Exactly, Kay say that is the important part right now. And Kay says, younger folks are the key. Kay says, Matt, you're a smart and progressive young guy. Get involved wherever you are living. Matt says, believe me, Kay, it's a family affair of political involvement. My wife and I and our twin daughters, who are 16, are doing everything we can at the local, state, and national level. Good for you, Matt. I'm glad to hear that. Matt says, it can be dangerous, Kay. My daughters have participated in protests down here in North Carolina. With the violence and the coronavirus, these are trying times. And Matt says, I love that you think of me as young Kay. Kay says, yes, I know that. I lived in Brunswick County, North Carolina for over 20 years. When I moved there, North Carolina was a blue state and a breath of fresh air to me. An Ohio born and raised person. Back here in Ohio again, thank you. Uh, Thanks to the GOP ruining North Carolina too. Kay says, you're young compared to this old boomer. Laugh out loud. I'm an old hippie, though. Matt says, yes, my wife and I moved down here about 15 years ago from the Boston area. Interesting dynamics down here in the triangle with big tech and universities, but you also get the old South. Matt says, yes, age is relative to my kids. I'm very old. Yep, I have another FB friend from up there. I love the rural southeast of North Carolina. I had when I moved there. I'm not a city girl here. Laugh out loud. Joe reached with the comments. It will sure look like the K and Matt show sidebar. That's all right. I like sidebars like that. Kay says they have ruined Brunswick County now too with overpopulation, way too much building of senior neighborhoods now. Not at all the same. Matt says, yes, so much has changed. Even though I've only been here for 15 years, I cannot tell you how many times I say to my girls, when you were little, there was an old farmhouse there where that housing development is. Yep, North Carolina has become the new Florida retirement area. Kay says, oh my God, I was just going to write that. Kay says, when we first moved to southeast North Carolina, there were still cotton fields and tobacco fields too, yes. And you can still see relics of that time throughout the state. Matt says, I must say I love the ocean a bit further south in South Carolina. The water is so nice in the summer. I always found it too cold in the Northeast. Have you ever taken your family to the Outer Banks? Oh my God, that was my favorite trip. Loved Ocracoke Island. Talk about history. Yeah, we went to the Outer Banks once, okay, to visit. And actually, we loved Ocracoke Island too. And the good restaurants and the beaches there. Just the whole vibe was good. The whole vibe was good. And Matt said a couple of times, lots of natural beauty there and history, yes, especially the pirates. Steve says Trump must not see his comments because he gets the ratio dragged on every tweet. So does Biden, by the way. Biden. Hashtag delete your account. Stacy says this is also depressing. None of it going to happen. Oh, and I hate deer. I might buy a gun to eliminate a bunch of them. God, Biden is bought and paid for. SMH. Evelina Pont says, isn't Europe's decision, but not to let Americans after the quarantine, in part as a response to Trump's original ban on them during the pandemic? I don't know, but it's perfectly well justified. Perfectly well justified. Trump can hardly object since he did the same thing. Of course, he will object anyway because he doesn't know about fairness. Case says, pay for it the same way Obama bailed out all the huge banks. Kay says, I don't think so, Evelina. Evelina says, only in part, though, since there does seem to be a political decision, too, not just based on health. Evelina says, only in part. Steve says, it's like 2008 on steroids. A mission accomplished 30 days straight isolation. On no feed, Dr. Joe dropped an F-bomb. I did? I dropped an F-bomb? I was unaware I dropped an F-bomb. Henry Yip said, the BS free press operated by CIA and Little England trolls to incite and agitate with propaganda, okay, and lies. Henry Yip, I have no idea what you're opening up your yap to talk about. By Joe, do you believe that violence is justified? Okay, in these times, uh, I don't know what you mean by asking whether violence, okay, is justified. What I think is that when people ask such questions, they're making a claim that we ought to do violence in a particular situation. And it seems to me that claim has to be compared, okay, with other claims. And it needs to be compared within a framework that tries to refute the proposition that violence, that we ought to be violent at such and such a time and such a place, okay, and such a situation. And that's going to depend on what the alternative claims are as to what we ought to do in that particular situation. And it may be that all of the other claims can easily be refuted, and that the only surviving claim at the time will be that we ought to do violence in this particular context, in this particular time, in this particular situation. And if that is the only surviving claim, then it's going to be up to us to make a decision. Okay. So, in other words, I don't believe that knowledge claims can be justified, but I do believe that knowledge claims can be refuted. And if we've refuted all the other knowledge claims, except for the violence claim, then we're going to have to decide what to do. And I'm going to leave it at that. Kay says, Useful Idiots on the Rolling Stone YouTube did a discussion on that a few days ago. They just did I don't know if you're talking about the same discussion, but I saw one of their programs today, a very interesting interview with Cornel West. And that interview was a brilliant interview. Cornel West, okay, was brilliant. I loved the interview. And Cornel West had some very interesting comments to say about the place of violence in the movement. And so did Katie, okay, and Matt. But I thought that Katie was particularly brilliant in her questions and the things she had to say. Okay, in the long discussion, okay, with West. And Cornel West was just great. I mean, Brother Cornel was just great. Absolutely. Any other comments or questions? Matt says the oligarchy kills 45,000 people who have no health insurance. It kills 130K who die, okay, of poverty. It kills more than 45,000 who have no health insurance because it's already killed 130K people who are dying from COVID. Besides, Steve says, the useful idiots, okay, are useful. And Steve says, except hashtag big us. Okay? Hashtag not me, us. Any other comments? If not, I will say good night until tomorrow night, when I think we will be able to finish Pavlina's book. That'll be tomorrow night. And then on Wednesday, we're going to have a big a Q&A, okay, on Wednesday. I'm sorry. We're going to have a big Q&A on Thursday. On Wednesday, we're going to finish up the case for a job guarantee. Hey, Russ, you're still here. Thanks. Hopefully, I'll see you tomorrow night. And Dolores, thank you very much. And thank you for all your help. So take care and have a great night.